Okay, there we go. So, hi Vanessa, welcome back. I see you've just joined us. Good morning. We've got Vanessa here and Carolina here and Damien, of course. Welcome guys to the first class in our online program, looking at traditional and contemporary astrology with a big focus on horary astrology, obviously, which I'll explain to you in just a moment. I know that Vanessa is quite comfortable with this kind of platform. Carolina, have you ever done anything like this in an online forum before?
I'm doing at the same time a webinar class that is
Yep.
from the States, and the lady that she does it, she's using WebEx. Have you heard? It's a Cisco platform,
Yep.
and it's very similar. I think this is
Good.
better.
But okay, good. All right, beautiful. So we've got that opportunity to speak and share and engage, which is great. The other reason that I've chosen this platform is because what it does is it gives you the opportunity to work together online. So it allows you to create I've created a forum, but it allows you to work as part of a community and to share your ideas with each other rather than just a platform which is purely for for a webinar. What the Google platform does is it lets us do a lot more together as a group. So that's why I've chosen it. So I'll explain all of that to you now. So first of all, I'll just give you all of the, what's the word for it, all of the housekeeping, all the housekeeping bits and pieces, and then we'll get into the material itself. So firstly, this first part of the course will go for 7 consecutive classes. So I'll be running this every Saturday at this time. Then we'll have a break of a week or 2 weeks. I'll let you guys decide because we can go either way, and then we'll get into the next semester, which will go for 9 weeks. So we'll work like that. The way that the course has been structured is around the school terms here in Australia, but because this is an online platform, we don't need to follow that. So we'll work that out as we go along. I'll explain to you now the 3 areas of functionality that are going to be particularly relevant for you as we go through this journey together. The first one is the drive. Now I know both of you have already got access to the drive, but I'll just explain this for anybody else who might be listening. Google Drive is one of the apps which we'll be using regularly in our time together, and the drive is where you're going to find all of your online documents. So every week you'll find a folder that will have all the reading material for you, as well as the PowerPoint if you'd like to go over that as well. Now in that folder I will put any information which I think is relevant to you. You don't need to read everything. In fact, you probably don't want to read everything because it might be a little bit too much work. But I just like to give you a lot of perspectives. So as I said, look inside that folder each week for material to flesh things out and just to really get you thinking. The main texts for this course are the ones that I've sent out to you in the course outline. So we've got the John Frawley text, the horary textbook. We've got Deb Holding's book on the houses, as well as any material from Deb Holding, which I will be uploading for you each week. And we also have the classical text, Christian Astrology from William Lilly. Now, that text, the William Lilly text, almost all of that is available free online, so I'll be giving that to you each week and we'll be reading through that together. So you don't need to go out and purchase that just yet, okay? But I would definitely, I want you to get the Frawley text because it's a very, very good introduction to horary, and I also want you to read all of the Deborah Holding material because they're kind of, if you like, contemporary leaders or masters in this field, and they've actually got quite different perspectives on horary. So studying both of them at the same time will allow us to broaden our scope, and it will just give you different perspectives or ways of thinking about what we're doing, which ideally I think will help you to become a better practitioner. The text by John Frawley, you will notice as we go along that I have a few issues or I disagree with some of what he says. Okay, And we'll talk about that as we go through. So don't take that book as a Bible, just take it as an opinion, but a very informed opinion based on a lot of practical, based on years and years and years of work in this particular area. The same thing with Deb Holding. As we go along, we might find that her approach is probably more aligned to where I'm coming from because it's less prescriptive than Frawley's work, but you as an individual may resonate with one more than the other. So it's up to you which way you take it. But we'll explore both perspectives as we go through. So just to recap, the Google Drive is where you need to look to find all your class material. And if you don't know how to find that on your computer, it's just a little grid on the right-hand, when you open your Google Plus page, it's a little grid at the top right-hand side. If you click on there, you'll see all your apps, and one of them is called Drive. Another one is called Groups, and this is also really important for you guys because this is where I've set up your online forum. So as we go through, you'll get two things which come from the group. One will be any announcements which I need to make. So if I need to communicate to you as a group, it will come from there. If you reply to that email, everyone will be able to see it, just so that you know, okay? At the bottom of those emails, you will see that there are options to reply as an email. You'll see links at the bottom of those emails to reply as an email, to reply online, or to unsubscribe. Of course, I don't want you to unsubscribe, but if you want to open it up to a forum, if you want to open it up to a group conversation, then you can just reply online rather than ending up with a huge email stream. The online part of the group is where I will encourage you to work together. So as we go, I'll be posting different questions or considerations, or once we get a bit of practice under our belts, some charts to work with. And I will encourage you to use the group forum to explore different ideas, to share ideas with each other, and also to and to comment on what other people are saying. It's really important, especially when you're online, to find that sense of connectivity with other people. And so this is particularly why I chose Google, because we have that capacity. There's another class running, and so once we have enough people, I also think it would probably be useful to set up a Facebook page, because that's easy for everyone to work with as well. So I'll do that too, and just so you've got somewhere to, you know, when you find something interesting online, you can share it with each other or comment or put photos up or whatever you want to do. It's your opportunity, your experience. But when you're working online, it's really important that you connect with other people, because the online learning can become really, I don't know, empty or dry, or it's very easy to become distracted and just lose momentum. So joining that group will really keep you involved. I mean, I'll do as much as I can, of course, but at a certain level, it's going to be the relationship you build with other people that keeps you going through the rest of the year. And finally, the other app that I need to explain to you is the Hangout, which is obviously where you are now. Okay, so both of you have obviously worked out that all you need to do is reply to the invitation and join the Hangout. I will always be sitting here ready to go about 20 minutes or so before the class, so you can come on before the recording starts and we can have a little chat about anything that's happening. Obviously, the people that are listening online to the recording won't have that opportunity, but anyone who's enrolled in the course has access to me as a tutor or a mentor. So what that means is at any time during our, the next year or so together, at any time, email me, call me, we can set up a Hangout. If you've got any problems or any questions, or you'd like to work through something, I'm always available for you. And as we get closer to the end of the year and you're working with your own charts, this is where the kind of the mentoring aspect of this course will come in a big way. I expect us to be working together quite a lot on charts and different ideas and different perspectives. We'll be doing that as a group together, but I'm also here to work with you on a one-on-one basis too. So please make use of that facility. And finally on the Hangouts, so once each class is over, then about 20 minutes or so later, that recording will be available as a YouTube clip. It will be shared privately, which means I think only 25 people can possibly view it. So you will get a private invitation to watch that video. Yep. So you guys may not want to again, but you might want to come back to it further down the track. Who knows? So you'll get that too as a YouTube invitation. Okay, so they're the kind of the technical bits and pieces I need to cover with you. The other thing, or two more things to talk about. One is the amount of work or the expectation that I have on you, and of course we all have very busy lives, and it can be really hard to fit in the time to do something extra like this. I totally understand that. For that reason, this course has been designed in a very progressive way, in the sense that for the first semester, there's not a lot to do. If you can keep up with the reading, which is John Frawley and Deborah Holding, that's the required reading. If you can keep up with that, that's about all you need to do. I want you to communicate and get used to working with the forum or the group. So there'll be some questions that I put up there, and I do want you to participate in that. But that's more about getting you working online rather than here are set tasks you have to fulfill. But as we get into from term 1 and 2 are fairly light on in terms of work, but you definitely need to keep up with the reading or you'll fall behind. When we get into term 3, that's when the real application will start. So in term 3, you can expect to need to spend maybe 5 or even 10 hours a week on the material. But when I say spending time on the material, what you'll be doing is you'll be actually doing charts. So it won't be like sitting and reading books and answering questions, because we'll have done that. By the time I get to term 3, you'll be working on charts. It's very practical. This course is very applied. It's not a theoretical course. Well, it is, of course, because we need to learn the theory to put it into practice. But that aspect of it is only actually half the course, and the other half is just practicing and refining and improving. Because where I am fairly confident you will be at the end of year 1 is you will be practicing as horary astrologers, meaning you will be able to answer quite specific questions with quite a huge degree of detail, far beyond what other more sort of contemporary astrologers would do. So for those of you who have studied astrology before, in a kind of a 21st century way, where there's a focus on spirituality and psychology, and there's a focus on the inner drives and motives, that's an excellent way of approaching astrology, and there's a huge amount to be learned from that. But where that tends to fall short is it tends to fall short in terms of detail, and it also tends to fall short in terms of applying it to the nuts and bolts of everyday life. So not everyone wants to hear about their evolutionary soul journey and kind of how they can delve into the deepest aspects of their psyche. Sometimes people want to know about, shall I buy this house? Am I going to get this job? Those kinds of very fundamental things. And this is horary astrology, the astrology we're studying in this first year, addresses that. It's very much nuts and bolts kind of stuff, but we do it in a way which is psychological. Or what I mean by that, we do it in such a way that it's client-centered. So we're not sitting here saying, I'm going to be able to answer any question that anyone gives me. What we're aiming to do is bring illumination or insight into any situation to help people make better choices, to empower them with the information that will allow them to take the bull by the horns and be in the driver's seat of their own life story. So it's still client-centered. We're still going to incorporate all the things that we may have already learnt from other areas of astrology, but we're going to be doing that in a very practical, fundamental way. So that's year 1 of the course. And just very quickly, if you decide that you're going to continue on with this course, what we then do in year 2, we'll start doing this at the end of year 1, but then we'll be doing it in a very detailed way in year 2. We then translate the horary astrology or the answering of very specific questions. We translate that back to natal astrology, and I show you how the two can blend together. And then in year 2, we focus on client-centered techniques. So we focus on predictive astrology. We focus on working with people. We focus on helping people to understand those deep core drives and motives. And I will introduce you to different teachers who specialize in some of those counseling fields. and I'll introduce you to specialized predictive techniques which will really help your skill set. So if you decide to go through to 2 years, where you will end up is you will end up being hopefully a very accurate astrologer, but also someone who has very pronounced skills in terms of client-centered work. So that's where we're going, okay? All right. Now, just before we launch into the material, I just want to give the both of you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have. So, Carolina, do you have anything that you would like to ask?
Not at the moment, no.
No? Okay, fantastic. That's great, thank you. And Vanessa, how about you?
Yep, everything seems clear.
You're fine. All right, beautiful. Great. All right, well, let's get into the material proper and have a bit of an introduction to what we're going to be doing over the next, over the next year together, really. The first 3 classes of our course look at the background of what we're about to study. So rather than jumping in with technique, what I much prefer to do is spend some time thinking about why we're doing what we're doing so that we do it in a more holistic way. Okay, in my experience of teaching astrology, a lot of times students become quite confused with the theory because they actually don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And we're about to venture into an area called predictive astrology, and I think it's probably the most, in some senses, it's the most philosophically challenging area of astrology, but it's also the most rewarding because it really pushes us to think about the nature of reality and why we do what we do. So we're going to explore that first in the first 3 classes. There's not a lot of technique or astrology until we get into week 4, but this is essential to really get clear about what it is that you're doing. So I want you to think for yourselves about where you're coming from or why you're doing something like this. So class 1, we look at an introduction to what's called divination. So let's start with this quote. In the beginning, this comes from Dane Rudger, a famous astrologer, a famous 20th century astrologer, who is not typically known for his horary work. He's known for his psychological or evolutionary work, but it's interesting that he had some really good stuff to say about horary astrology too, and we can learn a lot from him. So he says, consider the sky, question its ordered patterns, ask of the universal harmony for an answer. Just as nature has a cure for every ill, so the sky has a solution for every problem. And that's the premise that we're working from. We're working from the idea that somehow within the whole, there's already the solution that we seek. So we're talking about a holographic approach to the universe. We're talking about ourselves being embedded in a cosmos, which is mysterious, but still understandable on a certain level. Okay. And what we are doing when we practice this form of astrology called horary is, or when we're doing, in fact, any predictive work, is we're actually engaging in what is known as divination. This is a term which isn't used very often these days. It's in some senses a more classical term, but thinking about what we do in terms of divination is probably very useful, because astrology is not so much about cause and effect. It's not so much about saying, well, Mars is in this sign and so this is going to happen to you. It's much more about saying, well, this is the pattern that's unfolding, i.e. Mars is in this sign, and then if we extrapolate upon that pattern, we may be able to find some meaningful information that can inform our present circumstances. That's probably a much more intelligent way of understanding what astrology actually is. And so therefore, it's actually a form of divination. So here's an interpretation of divination which comes from Rob Hand, again another leading light in contemporary astrology. He says that divination is knowing what the divine is doing, what the state of the spiritual underpinning of reality is. It's prophecy in the original sense of the word, not the prediction of the future, but the explanation of the present. And this is essential for you as budding predictive astrologers To get this very clear to yourselves, your job, if you choose to do this work, your job is not to tell people what's going to happen, because they have free will. They're the ones in charge of what's going to happen to them. Your job, if you like, is to help illuminate or explain the present to them. And what this form of astrology will do is it will give you an illumination into the present, which is phenomenal, which is profound. It opens up an amazing kind of opportunity for contemplation based on the very fact that it's possible. The very fact that we can do this based on the position of the planets is awe-inspiring. Okay? And our astrology works towards trying to, you know, in a very humble way, get a glimpse into the present through the majesty of the cosmos. So as predictive astrologers, we practice the art of divination, which I would suggest to you is a sacred responsibility based upon pattern and meaning. Now, the notion of a sacred responsibility is something I'd like to flesh out a little bit more as well, because I would also like to suggest to you that horary is not something that can be approached in a flippant way. And I would also suggest to you that when we enter into it with that sense of the sacred, when we go towards it with a feeling of, well, I have a responsibility here, or there's something bigger than me going on, we actually get much better results. So it's not something which can be studied scientifically. You can't statistically say, right, I'm going to prove this by getting 1,000 people together and just doing this over and over and over and over again. It's more than just something that's a replicable pattern. There's a sacred or a mysterious, or if you like, a numinous aspect to divination, which requires participation from both you as the practitioner, i.e. your sacred responsibility, as well as participation from the person who's asking the question. Okay. So, this notion of pattern and meaning, it's important that we get a sense, or it's important that we get very clear that that's what we're working with. We're not working with the moon making us do anything or Jupiter making us do anything. We're working with a notion of pattern and meaning. So I find this quote to be quite beautiful. It comes from a gentleman named Russell Hoban. It was written in the early 80s, I think. And he says, anything you hear is a pattern of sound waves, and every pattern refers to all other patterns. Everything is some kind of information. The universe is continually communicating itself to us in a cosmic Eucharist of waves and particles. So this is where we get that, this is where we touch on the edges of quantum physics, but it's also where we're very much in the field of the online space. When Russell Hoban wrote these words, he could never have had any sense of what was about to come 10 years later, i.e. the World Wide Web. But now we live in an age where we actually are becoming more and more awakened to the reality that everything is some kind of information, that we can and are constantly communicating to ourselves and with each other, and our computers work, as if you like, as a window into this wholeness, into this completeness, into this cosmic Eucharist of waves and particles that we call the Internet, or the World Wide Web. That same concept, that same philosophy is exactly what's going on at a bigger level when we're thinking about our solar system or our cosmos. We have around us a very sophisticated mechanism for distributing waves, particles, and information, and that information can be read by those who take the time to do it. Just like a web developer can do very sophisticated code and do incredible things these days, so astrologers also have the ability to use very sophisticated techniques to understand waves, particles, and information. Because the moment has a language that can be understood by various means: poetry, music, mysticism, or astrological inquiry. I'm not sitting here today saying astrology is a religion, astrology is something you must believe in, astrology is the be-all and end-all. I'm not saying that. All we're exploring is the idea that astrology is, if you like, a form of technology which allows us to understand waves and particles, therefore to uncover pattern, and therefore to find meaning. Because if we accept that the cosmos is structured by pattern and relationship, then we have the chance to recognize that pattern and then elucidate its meaning. Now, I know both of you guys who are listening at the moment, I know you've both had some experience with astrology. So I know that you've probably already had moments where you've uncovered information that's kind of been incredible, or where it's been like, oh my God, I can't believe that that information could come out, or I can't believe that description of me and my personality is so accurate. And one of the things that astrology does in such a profound way is it really reminds us that we don't understand the cosmos that we live in. But what we do have the opportunity to understand is that there's this incredible harmony, there's this incredible balance, there's this incredible synchronicity that works through the cosmos. And it's that level of harmony and balance which we can actually rest upon. That's where our technique comes in. It's knowing that the cosmos itself has its own structure, and if we just look to that structure for information, we're going to find some pretty useful bits and pieces. And that's a really important thing, because as much as we look out to the cosmos, so to speak, for structure and meaning, we can then also look within ourselves for the same structure, for the same pattern, and for the same meaning. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper into this sense of divination, because as we touched on, divination means to seek to become aware of something which is usually future through oracular means. Now, I want to explore this word oracle or oracular, because I think in lots of ways that's what we're doing. We're not scientists, we're not doctors, we're not artists, but I think we're somewhere in the middle of all of those things. Each of those, let's say, professions or areas of human expertise, they all share or they all touch upon skills or qualities that the astrologer embodies. And the astrologer embodies a very ancient position within society, and I think that is the position of the oracle. So let's have a look at what oracles are, because that will help us to understand what we do and also the kinds of conditions that are required for a successful astrological consultation. So we need to go back to the ancient world, to the classical world, to the Greco-Roman world, where this notion of an oracle, or as somebody or something functioning within society to bring unknown information to light, where that was very much a part of society, not something that people challenged or questioned, much more something that people accepted as capable, as real. Certain individuals have the ability to bring unknown information to light. And so in the classical world, divination was divided up into two types. One, called oblativa, was divination which was given, whereas the other form, impetrativa, was divination that was provoked. So what that means is we could sometimes receive information that would come without any kind of participation. So it would arrive as an omen, it would arrive as a sign, it would be like a meteor appearing in the sky at a particular moment, or let's say another form of this kind of divination would be the practice of studying the entrails of an animal, where the information was already given and it was just up to somebody to then read that information. Or the other kind of divination that was also recognised was one which was provoked, meaning the person who sought the information took an active role in seeking an answer. So participation was seen as possible but not necessary in order to divine the will of the gods. But most classical authors seem to agree that most often for an oracle to be successful, there must be some kind of participation. Now, without going off into a huge kind of tangent about ancient Greek history, which I'm not in any way, shape or form an expert in anyway, we see this notion of participation in what was famously called the Oracle of Delphi. What we know from our text is that at the entrance of the Oracle of Delphi were written the words, "Know thyself," which is something that which we will have encountered in many different forms if you've done any kind of esoteric or spiritual study. This notion of know thyself being a very important thing, and it is, because the whole point of seeking an oracle, the whole point of seeking information is not to, score points on a material level. It's not to get ahead in the world or to, to acquire more money or any of those things. The whole point of it is to know thyself. And so if you go towards seeking an answer, it's far better for you to approach that situation with an openness to what you can learn about yourself and your position within the world, rather than just expecting somebody to hand over to you what you think you need. Okay? So if any of us have ever gone to see a psychic or a tarot reader or any of those things and ever gone with the expectation of being told what to do, you've probably walked away with lots of different ideas about what's going to happen next, and then maybe found out that none of it turned out to be the case. Because whenever we hand over responsibility to somebody else to tell us what to do, we actually fail to participate in our own knowledge and our own awakening. And so I think that really gets in the way of a successful oracle. It's really important to understand that participation is central to a successful outcome. And so this is participation from you as the astrologer, the sacred responsibility which I touched upon earlier, but this is also the participation of the person seeking the information as well. So another way that we can think of this, if we bring it into a more contemporary framework, is to think of it in terms of co-creation. This is a notion that's quite generally discussed in spiritual circles, business circles, in all sorts of areas of our contemporary culture. A lot of people are now talking about co-creation, which is a sense of choosing to participate in your own future to create the circumstances that we want. So some people might use that on a very gross level. I want to achieve X amount of sales by the end of the month, so I'm going to visualize that every day, and I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to see myself doing it, and it's going to be this. And they're using the power of their mind to create the outcome that they want. Or other people may use it in a more elevated or subtle way, in the sense of kind of working towards developing consciousness, working towards greater levels of awareness, this kind of thing. So contemporary spiritual teachers often describe the higher self as an aspect of divinity which is immanent within the individual, meaning that in the world that we live in, a lot of people have come across the idea that there's something within us as individuals which is higher or transcendental, and that part of us, if we learn to tap into it, can help guide our actions. Engaging with this aspect of consciousness can affect change in one's life. So in a contemporary kind of a scenario, what we have is this sense that if we lean into the spiritual aspects of who we are, we can find guidance, we can find information, we can participate in creating our own reality. And this is a very important idea which also comes forward through the practice of predictive and horary astrology. The notion that you can actually create your own reality by choosing to become more conscious of the present, not the future. It's not so much the future that matters, it's the present. It's what's happening now. It's the choices that you're making now, the perspective that you have now, the influence that others may have now that affects the future. And that's what we're really seeking to do. We're seeking to illuminate the present tense in order to have more, not control, but in order to have more responsibility for the future as it unfolds. So let's have a bit of a think about this. Can we create our own realities by consciously participating in them? That's something that I'd like you to think about as we go forward. I mean, is it possible for you to change the nature of your reality by projecting into it what you would like to see? what role does imagination play in manifestation? How important is it that you can actually see the outcome that you want? I think it was Oprah who famously said, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think that's a very succinct way of saying that when we can imagine something in our future, we're already on the road to creating that reality. And this is not a mystical or kind of esoteric thing at all. Scientists use this every day when they come up with new discoveries. Nothing will be discovered or developed in a laboratory or tested unless it is first imagined. We have to have this faculty of imagination, this faculty of visualization, to be able to bring things into form. And so we can also use this at a very personal level to maybe create the outcomes that we want in our lives, or when we're working at the astrological level, we can also use this faculty of imagination to see different perspectives and imagine different outcomes. And so one of the things we're going to be exploring as we go through this course is ways to expand and develop our imagination. This is a really important point. So I'm going to do a big underline here. From my experience of teaching students who focus on, tell me the rules, tell me what to think, I just need to learn how to do astrology, but I'm not going to apply any of my own imagination, find it very difficult. It's very hard to practice something like astrology unless you engage your own imagination. And the reason for that is this. When you're doing something like astrology, what you're doing is you're activating both the linear, analytical aspects of consciousness, of your mind, as well as the intuitive, prophetic, creative and receptive aspects of your mind. Both spheres, if you like, both hemispheres of the brain need to actually work together. And when you engage your imagination to try and dream up different outcomes for yourself or for a client, you're actually building neural pathways that lay down the foundation for even more perceptive analysis, even more perceptive work. The more that you bring your imagination to play, the better the results you're going to have, because you will end up creating a framework within your own mind which can receive very subtle levels of information, translate that into a picture, and then explain or articulate that to someone or to yourself in a very logical, detailed and analytical way. That's what we work towards doing. So I'm going to be giving you exercises as we go that push you into that framework. In my experience, 80% of students resist this process. Most of us resist anything that puts us in touch with our imagination or our creativity, because we've been told, we tell ourselves we're not creative, I'm not artistic, I can't do this, I can't do that. Or we tell ourselves that being creative is silly, it's a waste of time. You know, it would be much better for me to read 20,000 pages of somebody else's interpretation of astrology than to sit down and spend half an hour drawing a picture. But in fact, the opposite is true. The time that we spend developing our imagination and our capacity to think in visual terms, the quicker we are towards the path of becoming very good astrologers. I would much prefer you to learn to use your imagination than to read all of the information that I give you. The information is secondary to your imagination, because the solutions that you're attempting to illuminate, or the present tense that you're attempting to illuminate for yourself and other people, that all depends on your imaginative faculty. Okay, so I've made a bit of a point of that because I really want to drum it in. We'll keep on coming back to imagination as we go through. I give you exercises which are purely visual, and it's not because it's easy, it's not because it's silly, it's simply because we want to create those neural pathways. Okay? All right, so just at this point, let me throw it over to you guys. Have you got any comments that you'd like to make in terms of creating your own reality? Have you ever seen any evidence of this in your life where you have actually, let's say, made a decision about something and then seen it manifest in form? Just feel free to just speak away.
Definitely. And you know what I've really noticed is that when I'm visioning strongly, when I'm really participating, is that I then become open to seeing different signs. I become open to opportunities, and so I feel like by shifting our perception, we're doing something that's actually very real in that we're able to see these things coming into our lives. So it's not it does have a magical feel to it, but I feel like there's a very practical aspect of it too, where we just become more connected. And I've seen that tons of times in my own life, and I've seen the opposite when I'm not participating and where I'm off. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Vanessa. That's really good. Another way of kind of almost like a metaphor for what you're describing there is the difference between, in this day and age, we have a very real example of that. The difference between the person who sits there and says, I'm a technophobe, I can't go online. It's too hard. So they have one approach versus the individual who simply goes, I'm going to go online and see what's out there. There is such a big difference between what's possible for those individuals simply based on the willingness to access the imagination. So what you're talking about in terms of becoming open to solutions that had been unforeseen, I can't say, I don't know why this happens, but I know it does happen in that when we activate our imagination, we tap into frequencies of information which we can't do in any other way. Okay. Now, it's not that we then get carried away with the fairies and we start imagining unicorns and people's past lives and all this kind of stuff. It's not that. It's about being able to then go, right, so out of that realm of information that I've now accessed, what's the most logical, practical and realistic in this moment, because that's what I'm going to choose to bring forward. So, and I say this with all due respect, when astrologers or psychics spend time going on about people's past lives and this and that and the other, that's all like interesting, of course, but then it's like, well, how does that apply to the here and now? So what horary astrology does, the form that we're about to explore, is it brings it into the here and now. There's not a lot of room for fluffy speculation. We are aiming towards specificity, detail, and practical application, okay? Which, once you've mastered that, then you can feel free to go off into the realms of past lives and ascended masters and angels and all these other aspects of consciousness. But this gives you a tool to come into the three-dimensional world and talk at a very day-to-day level. Okay. What about you, Carolina? Have you, this sense of using imagination or creating your own reality, is that something that you've explored in your life?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, pretty much same as what Vanessa was saying. It's just a state of non-resistance, just to be able to read through what's going on in your life and why you're getting the signs you're getting, and sometimes more challenging than others, but yeah, very rich. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. It's a I think it's like we're recovering a faculty that we used to have, but then we lost. Because human beings used to be really, really good at living in the imaginal aspect of life, but needed to do a lot of work on the rational and the analytical and the scientific in order to build the level of society that we live in today. So that's been all really wonderful and useful. But now we're at a new stage of our evolution, and we're really learning to open back up again to that imagination and to use it in a sophisticated way, and in a sophisticated and an informed way. And who knows what's possible? But the internet's showing us as a very clear, not even symbol. It's just the internet is the reality that we are mapping for ourselves. The same level of sophistication that the internet is generating, that's also what we're generating in our own minds, through our own consciousness. So where we're going to go, who knows? But it is cosmic. It has to be cosmic. How do we know this? Because astrologers have been observing for 6,000 years or so that when the planets are in certain relationship to each other, or us here on Earth, it tends to lead to certain states or changes within individuals. What we're doing isn't based on speculation. What we're doing is simply based on empirical fact It's been observed time and time and time and time and time again that this is the pattern. So if the planets can replicate that pattern, then surely our consciousness extends beyond the realms of the material life here on Earth. It must do, but we just don't really know how to use it yet. Anyway, they're very grand philosophical concepts, but they're important because all of these things are going to be questions that you need to sort out for yourself. So when you talk to someone at a party and you tell them, oh, I'm doing this online course and we're learning predictive astrology, there are going to be people that stand there and whether they tell you or not are going to assume that you are an absolute fool, you're an idiot, you have no idea what you're talking about, you may even need some kind of psychological help. That's the assumption they will make because they haven't spent any time thinking about these things. Whereas you, hopefully, will have spent some time reflecting on the philosophical and ethical background, understanding the connections and understanding that what we're doing here is not wishful thinking. What we're doing here is, in lots of ways, brave new thinking. We're standing at the threshold of human consciousness and we're saying, well, let's extend, let's push out, but we're happy to live with mystery. We're happy to live with a sense of not knowing it all. But what we do know is that this has worked. This works. It's been proven time and time and time again. So let's learn how to use it, and then let's push out from there. So it's really important that you understand why you're doing what you're doing. It will give you that solid inner foundation to make confident predictions rather than, oh, I'm not really sure, and it might be this and it might be that. I want you to be confident. You will be confident when you understand why you're doing what you're doing. So I've dropped into your folders, into your reading material, a bit of an interesting text. It's a very much, in some senses, a tangent for us. It's the introduction to an Indian horary astrology text. In India, they call it Prasna Padavi. The reason that I've put that in there, and their approach or their way of doing it is quite different from ours, but the reason that I put it in there is it's quite an interesting read because they don't just look at the chart, which is what we will be looking at. They consider things like the flow of breath through the astrologer's nostrils, the direction the person asking the question arrives from, the sounds of birds or animals, the weather, or any body parts that the client touches during the consultation. So what this tells us is that they also have developed a science or a technology which reinforces the idea that all aspects of the moment are considered meaningful and can deliver useful information. So that's another idea which I'd like to put forward for you. As you go through your studies, you're going to find that the moment will speak to you if you're open to listening. And so when you work with a client or when a friend asks you a question, there's going to be information around you that's going to inform that situation. It's not just the position of the planets, although the position of the planets is a phenomenal tool, but it's all other bit. There are also other bits and pieces that come in. So anything that happens during a consultation may be considered as part of that consultation. Okay? So if you've got time or you're interested in just getting a bit of a sense of how another culture approaches this, have a read of that. It's difficult, but anyway, it might spark your imagination, and that's the point. It's all about imagination. Okay. So let's push on now and get a little bit more astrological. So we'll start to get drilled down into this thing which is called horary astrology. So back to Dane Rudhyar. He tells us, every horary chart cast in answer to a need which is well formulated and real, underlining that, should be considered as an expression of universal intelligence seeking to re-establish the harmony disrupted by the crisis or problem which caused the need. So it's a kind of long sentence, but a very simple way of kind of breaking that down is to say, every time a person in an honest way asks a question of themselves, we can think of that as a symptom or an example of the universal harmony trying to come back into balance with itself, because every individual human being is an aspect of consciousness, is an aspect of the divine. So every time we come out of ourselves Whether when we get ill, when we become uncentered, when we're feeling a bit moody, whatever it is, every time we're out of balance with ourselves, it's not a moment for judgment. It's a moment to say, now the individual, now the universal intelligence is seeking to come back into balance with itself. So that's the space that we work in. But what's really important in this sentence is the notion of need. Okay, for horary to work well, there needs to be a need. It doesn't work particularly well for flippant questions. It doesn't work particularly well if we're just thinking, well, I'm just going to test this out and see if it's real or not. There needs to be a need in order for it to work, because there needs to be a moment of cosmic disharmony seeking balance. There needs to be that flow between the whole, the one and the whole, in order for us to find a moment to elucidate meaning. Because again, in pattern there is meaning, and pattern helps us to decode time. So we're looking at ways of understanding time, past, present and future, by finding the pattern, or if we use the internet as an example, finding the code which pertains to that particular moment. That's what we're looking for. What is essential is to realise that we can reach this intelligence directly as it becomes focused into our mind, just as well as indirectly when expressed through our relationship to the universe, and particularly to the solar system, which is the living space of our sun or source of our vitality. So again, another really interesting quote here is talking about this sense of we can reach the intelligence directly as it's focused in our mind, meaning we seek the answer, or indirectly when it's expressed through our relationship to the universe, meaning, let's say I'm sitting there in a cafe one day and I'm really not knowing what to do with myself next, and then someone sits down next to me and they just say something that just turns my switch on and suddenly it all makes sense, and now I know what to do. That's an indirect kind of an example. So again, going back to our classical world, we've got the active and the passive, the oblativa and the impetrativa, not kind of oracle, but both of them work. You can access information actively, or information can arrive at your doorstep. It doesn't really matter, but horary, what we're working with, is more of the active variety. So, let's look at what horary actually is. Horary astrology is the art of answering specific questions. So our aim is to learn the techniques required to understand the nature of the present, so that we may make sound judgments around how events are likely to unfold. I'll just explain that word judgment, because the word judgment in a horary context does not mean passing judgment on someone or being critical. This is the word that's used for a prediction or for the outcome of a chart. So when you do a chart, and you come up with your interpretation, that's called your judgment, okay? And it's a better word than the word prediction or even prognostication, which is another astrological term, because judgment allows for the sense of what's actually going on, which is weighing up a number of complex factors before deciding on a most likely outcome. That's what you're doing most of the time when you're doing horary. There's lots of conflicting bits and pieces of information to consider, and you make an interpretational call as to what you think is most likely. All right? We're not seeking to foretell fortunes, but to illuminate the present with knowledge and insight. Okay? And ultimately, our aim is to offer service to both the clients and to the divine. And as I've mentioned, there's something sacred about this role, and for this reason, the art of horary should be approached with great respect. Now, from a personal perspective, I find this to be very true. Not only have I found in my years practicing astrology, not only have I been, humbled and awe-inspired by the incredible accuracy and detail that can come through from an astrological reading, not only does that inspire reverence, but also the fact that when I put myself in a place, when I center myself, when I, spend a moment or two reflecting on the sacredness of what I'm about to do, or when I ask for help, when I pray, when I ask for guidance before working with a client, it's always far better. The results, I always get better results than if I just rush in there and go, oh God, I've got to read this chart and this, and this, and it just comes off the top of my head, which, I'll be honest, there are times when that happens too. No one's perfect, and in a working astrologer's life, in a busy, busy life of anybody, there are going to be times when you're really present, and there are going to be times when you're just keeping up with the day-to-day of life. But I absolutely know that when I spend time giving the proper due respect to the sacredness of what's going on, the results are better. Better for me, but also better for the client, which is the point of what we're doing. Our aim is to offer service, not to be right, not to be the best, not to be paid, but though that's nice. Our aim is to offer service, and we have to work towards that. And so I think there's a sacred responsibility to be the best that you can be, but there's also a sacred responsibility, I think, to respect the fact that you are operating or choosing to participate in an oracular, as a form of, as an oracle. So you're choosing to participate in a form of divination, which in some senses means that you are potentially having an influence on someone's life, but that influence is almost always going to be extremely positive and extremely beneficial if you focus yourself on illuminating the present and then helping them to make better choices. So I avoid telling anybody what to do. Sometimes you will make a judgment to go, look, I'm really, really, really sure about this, so I'm going to say my advice is do X. But in most situations, you're going to go, well, this is how I'm seeing it now, and this is the way that the circumstances are, based on an accurate assessment of the past. And so therefore, I'm going to suggest that these are the possible paths for you to take. But it's up to you which way you go. All right? That's what we aim for, a clear illumination of the present. When we engage in horary work, we're seeking to explore the relations between the mundane or the physical world and the divine. We assume that knowledge is there for those who seek it, and so we endeavour to gain information that is useful and verifiable. And this notion of verifiable is also there for us in our horary work, because what horary lets you do is it not only lets you understand the present, but it also lets you understand the past. And so there are actually specific techniques which I will be teaching you can use to verify the information that you have. So if you're not sure about whether the chart's got the right information or not for you to work with, there are techniques which you can use to check the veracity of that chart, to check whether or not it's accurate. There are also techniques that you can use to look at past events. And if you can describe to somebody accurately past events based on what the horary is showing you, then you can pretty confidently say that you're probably then likely to predict or to understand future events. So we're looking for ways to be useful and verifiable. This is not the beauty of horary, and all the technique that I'm going to be showing you as we go through. The beauty of horary is that it doesn't leave you out on a limb kind of going, oh well, it's a bit vague, and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. It's a very, very, very well-developed system, and it's got lots of checks and balances in place to help you feel confident. And confidence comes from understanding the context of the question. Okay? So, in that sense, yes, it's an act of divination, but it's also an act of common sense, because at the end of the day, you just end up going, well, this is probably most likely based on what's already occurred. Okay? Now, another quote which I like to keep in the foremost of my own mind and students' mind is this quote which comes from William Lilly. The more holy thou art, more near to God, the purer judgment thou shalt give. Now, Lily wrote a book which is published a book called Christian Astrology, and William Lilly was writing. He's considered the most preeminent horary astrologer to have. It's like he's the high priest, if you like, of this particular art form. He was practicing in Elizabethan England around 1600s, in a time when astrologers had the ear of the king. Astrologers were very important, had a very important role in society, where they would give advice, insider information at a state or a political level, as well as at a personal level, and as well as at a medical level. So the astrologer had a really big role to play within society, because they would be helping lots of different individuals with all sorts of bits and pieces. And Lilly was an expert at this, and he's given us the textbook that we will be studying. And one of the reasons his textbook is so useful is because there's lots of examples in his book of how he's used these techniques. So there's a lot for us to learn. And his notion of being nearer to God, in the world that we live in today, sometimes religious connotations come up, and we don't want to be religious. We don't want to be affiliated with any particular belief system. And I'm not suggesting that you need to be. All you need to be, as we talked about just before, is you need to be aware that there's something sacred going on. You need to be aware that there are aspects of what we're doing which are bigger than us, greater than us, mysterious to us. And just having some respect for that is all that's required. But the purer you are, the better your judgments are going to be. So I leave that up to you in terms of what you want to do with that information. All right. Now, coming up to a more contemporary understanding of what it is that we're doing, I'm now going to introduce to you another of our very important authors for the semester. Sorry, for the whole year, probably for all of your astrological life, is the work of Deb Holding. So are you guys familiar with Deb Holding? Have you come across her website or her stuff before? No. Okay. So first thing to say, I better put this into the chat field actually. I'm just putting in her website. This is the place. Oh, that should say obviously www. But this is the place for your horary studies. This website is a fantastic resource of traditional texts and contemporary interpretations of horary and other forms of traditional astrology, which we will be working from. This is where a lot of the articles that I will be sharing with you come from. This is where you can get access to lots of free resources, online forums, etc., etc. She is I think probably a reincarnation of William Lilly, but she is one of the best horary authorities working today with this fabulous resource for all students to use. So I definitely encourage you to explore this website. Lots of information there. And we will be reading regularly from her work, because she gives a very contemporary view of horary, which I think is really useful. She's describing the practice of answering specific questions in a 21st century framework, which is where we're going to be going. So Holding makes a similar distinction, as the ancients did, between active and passive forms of horary. And she describes passive forms of horary as ones which place the onus on the system itself. What that means is, there are some, as you go through this study and as you start to research and read different articles and bits and pieces, you will come across authors who say, this is the way you do it, and that's all there is to it, and if you just follow the rules, you're going to come up with the answer every time. And one of those individuals is John Frawley, the author of the textbook that I recommend to you. His approach is very much, this is something given to us by God, we don't need to question it, we know it works. Every single time you ask a question, you're going to be able to find the answer if you apply yourself properly to it. So he says that you can ask any question at any time and horary will give you the answer. Now I haven't found that to be true in practice, but that approach to horary is a passive way of understanding what we're doing. Because under this system, the astrologer assumes the role of passive observer and interpreter of what the stars declare, therefore not daring to maximise upon their own creative input. So what Holding is saying here is that when we just assume that the answer is always going to be there, and if we just follow the system that other people have done, we're going to get the answer. We're not actually allowing for our own creative input. We're not bringing our imagination into it. We're not bringing our psyche. We're not bringing our soul. And I think that there are definitely some issues with that on a philosophical level, but also on a practical level. I personally, having practiced this for a good 7 or so years, I haven't found that every single time a question's asked that we get to an answer. And I think the reason for that is because there needs to be, as this lecture has been about, there needs to be a level of participation which comes from the spiritual aspect of the self, from consciousness, from the psyche seeking wholeness. So, Holding says an active approach to horary invites creativity and participation in the sense that it allows the astrologer to establish a framework that demands self-reflection, an exploration of the root causes which led to the development of the problem in the first place, or a desire to acquire a mastery of the self that allows the problem to be more competently addressed at any other point in the future. So breaking that down, Holding is teaching or putting forward an approach to horary astrology, to answering specific questions, which says we can use this tool to stimulate self-reflection, to look for the root causes underneath the situation. So rather than just saying, so for example, if someone says, oh, when am I going to meet? When am I going to get married? Which is a very common question that people will ask. Rather than just assuming, oh, well, I can just go and cast a chart and tell them when that's going to be, a far richer, more productive and probably more realistic approach is to examine the root causes of the question. Why is the person asking that question? What's going on for this person? What's happening at a deeper psychological or spiritual, cultural, familial level for this individual to put them in the position that they would even be consulting an astrologer around this particular topic. Because when we flesh out the root cause, we actually empower ourselves and other people to really be in charge of their own lives, to really make better choices in their future based on understanding what's going on. So if the person's asking, when am I going to get married, but we then find out that they have got very deeply held patterns of rejecting partners or of avoiding intimacy or of choosing the wrong individual, we need to work with that first. No point in trying to answer, oh, it's going to be February 2016. That's redundant. Because even if they do meet someone in February 2016, and even if they do get married, that pattern's just going to keep on playing out. So the likelihood of that ending up as an unhappy marriage is high. Whereas, if we seek root causes, if we invite creativity and participation, we actually can do healing work rather than just take on the role of answering specific questions. And I want to strongly encourage you to start to understand yourself as an oracle in the role of someone who's offering information which can be healing. It can be healing, it can be one sentence which is healing, or it can be a number of consultations. That depends on you and the kind of astrologer that you become, and whether you want to do that kind of client work. There's lots of different decisions that you need to make as a practitioner along the way. But if your aim is to illuminate the present, there's so much good that you can do for people, and it's not about assuming responsibility for them, and it's not about denying their free will, which is really important. So Holding goes on to say, astrologers coming into its study should realise that elements of its practice are intrinsically divinatory, and they should have a clear understanding of what this and the term judicial astrology means. So I'm just going to explain that to you now, because these kind of traditional terms you'll keep on finding as you study horary astrology. So natural astrology is one form of astrology which involves the study of celestial cycles and patterns and their manifestation in observable phenomena. So it's things like studying astrology for weather patterns, studying astrology to diagnose medical conditions, or studying astrology to understand what's going to be happening to different countries, etc., looking at eclipses and what are called ingresses and things like that. That's a form of natural astrology where there's a sense of bigger cycles and patterns and everything being woven into it. So that kind of astrology tends to be more passive in the sense that here's the rule, this is how it works, this is what we expect to see. Whereas judicial astrology, which is the use of astrological principles plus personal conjecture or interpretation to form a judgment, that's the kind of astrology we're doing. So predictive forms of astrology, the kinds of natal work where you're really getting into subtle levels of personality, and definitely what we're doing in the first year, which is horary, this is very much known as judicial astrology, which means developing the capacity to make personal conjecture based upon the foundations or the rules which have been set in place. So our study will blend both natural and judicial aspects, but our main focus is on judicial. The reason I've put this PowerPoint in is because there's a document in your folder which the first article from Deb Holding is in your folder, and she explains this in a lot more detail, and I would just like you to get comfortable or familiar with this terminology, because it's thinking about what you're doing at this point which is really important. So the nature of judgments. Horary's practice combines astrological principle, including symbolic projections, with elements of conjecture, common sense, psychological insight, and most would claim inspiration or intuition. The aim being to pull together a complex combination of significations, meaning astrological patterns based on planets and their placement, and read the chart most effectively within its context. Our aim is to be descriptive, focused, and as detailed as possible, and from here a reliable and accurate assessment of a likely outcome can be suggested, which is, as I've said, called a judgment. Okay, so I've gone into this in a bit of detail because I want you to, again, really get a sense of what you're doing. I want you to know the reason why I'm going to be strongly encouraging you to use your imagination, to use visual tools, to develop that kind of capacity to speculate and explore. That's a really important point of becoming a good horary astrologer. The other thing that we need to kind of get our heads around is this whole notion of fate and free will. Because that's another thing that will come up for conversation with other people, or it's another question that's going to come up into your mind. Does this form of astrology, or does the idea that you can ask specific questions and get answers, does that negate free will? Because does that mean that everything's already been written anyway and so there is no choice? So we need to ask ourselves, does seeking answers with astrology deprive us of independence and self-reliance? Does it actually mean that there are less outcomes for us because things are set in stone? And what about free will? Does asking a question by nature affect the outcome? So if you give somebody a judgment, does it mean that because you put something into their mind that they're going to go ahead and make that happen? These are the kinds of philosophical ideas which you need to become comfortable with, because that's the basis of confidence, as I've said to you before. And these are things which demand some reflection. So it's not like we can sit here now and just say, oh yes, this is the answer and that's that. These are things that you need to sort of settle upon. I will suggest to you that there's no reason for astrology to deprive us of independence or self-reliance if we focus on illuminating the present. If we focus on giving as much information as possible, then we're empowering people to make their own choices. Whether or not that in itself affects the nature of the outcome, that's a chicken and the egg situation. No one can really say. But what, for me personally, what I feel comfortable with is that idea which we talked about earlier on, is that notion of the universal intelligence seeking harmony or balance. If someone comes to me and asks me a question about something, and then I give them an answer or a judgment, and then that affects the outcome, I don't need to feel morally responsible for what they choose to do, because the fact that they came in the first place means that they are seeking the answer, they've called it in, and they've chosen me and whatever input I'm going to give them as part of their own solution set. So they've done the whole thing, they've instigated the whole process, and I've just been a tool or a stepping stone in their own personal decision-making process. I may have affected the outcome. If I've been helpful, then I want to affect the outcome, but ultimately that responsibility isn't mine. And I also like to give my clients the credit of thinking, well, they're smart people. They're not basing their decisions on what I tell them to do. They're smart individuals who are simply gathering information in order to make for a more informed choice or perspective, and it's up to them what they do. I don't think people are that silly that they run around letting predictive astrologers tell them what to do. Actually, I need to qualify that. Some people are that silly. Some people try and hand over responsibility for themselves by getting you to do it all for them. You will know as you go along, you'll know the difference between a real question and one based on fear, or one based on curiosity, or one based on, I can't be bothered, I'll just go and ask, get my friend or get my astrologer to tell me what to do. You'll know the difference between those questions, and you'll find that when they're flippant, when there's no real commitment to the answer, when there's no willingness to explore the root cause, there's very likely to be a successful or a realistic outcome anyway. Horary, as I've said to you, has inbuilt mechanisms which will prevent that kind of thing happening. As a practicing astrologer, I don't encourage people to become, let's say, dependent on me and my predictive abilities, because I'm not interested in that. I have no interest in telling people what they're going to do. My only interest is to help people understand themselves, their present, and in some senses to ease their consciousness or elevate their consciousness or whatever it is. That's my main thing. If I end up telling them something that happens and it turns out to be correct, that to me is just a lovely confirmation that we live in a harmonious, ordered, and embedded cosmos. That's all it means to me. It doesn't mean I'm right. It's just, again, confirmation that everything's connected and it's all wonderful and it's all good. That's how I see it. But it's up to you. All right. Just before, there's just a couple of other bits and pieces here just to finish off. But just before I go on, do either of you want to make any comments about all of this material? It's all very I've gone off the slides. It's all very philosophical, I know. But do you have any thoughts at this point that you'd like to share? I can see sort of questioning faces. Vanessa, you're about to say something. Yep.
Yeah, I'm just feeling really appreciative because this lines up really well philosophically for me, this idea of illuminating the present and really empowering people to make choices and creating their own life. I feel like that's always been really important to me as a teacher and a counselor and as an oracle with astrology and tarot. And so I'm just really taking it in and just feeling grateful that I've landed in a space that fits me really well.
Oh,
excited for what's to come. Yeah.
Good, thank you. That's great. Yeah, thank you. The philosophical aspect of what we do is so important. Yeah, it's the foundation for confidence and success. So, yes, that's great. What about you, Carolina? How's all of this sitting with you at the moment? This kind of broader overview. You need to turn on the microphone. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, this is pretty much what I've been always following. Yeah, just self-development, not the just the prediction or the divination. And also the astrologers that I have gone in my life, they have followed also that line, so everything makes sense.
Beautiful.
It's really beautiful to hear you, and yeah, it's like coming home.
Good. Thank you. It's a funny thing to be speaking in the sense that we're well, I mean, we can see, well, you can't see me, but I can see you. But it's an interesting way of communicating. But I'm glad that it's coming across and that it's useful for you. Okay, so just with the 10 minutes or so that we've got left, there's a couple of other little concepts that I want to bring in. The main gist of what the first class is about we've covered, but I just want to drop a few little other bits and pieces of information in, beginning to introduce some technical language. So on the next slide, the second paragraph. Within the practice of horary, there are many sensitivities built around its ethical complexities. Its theoretical portions, which are traditionally termed the considerations before judgment, testify to the need for thoughtful reflection on what is being asked, since horary has the ability to realise the best or worst of astrology's potential use in consultation. So, this is what I've been touching on as I've been going through. There are inbuilt mechanisms within the practice or the tradition of horary which help you to weed out, let's say, bias on your own part or bias on the part of the the client. And these are called the considerations before judgment. We're going to have a look at them next, I think it's next week. I'm pretty sure it's next week. We'll have a look at them and start to explore what they are and how they're applied in practice. You're going to find that there's quite a lot of debate out there particularly in the online world about all the different considerations and what they might mean, this, that and the other. We're going to look at them as philosophical tools rather than dogma, rather than you must do this and this and this and this and this. Because as Holding's talking about, these ideas that we have that there are certain tests or mechanisms that can be put in place to work out whether or not we should even do a horary chart. These actually probably exist more to amplify the idea that we need to think about what we're doing more than be fearful about what we're doing. So we're going to look at that. So I just want to bring this idea of the considerations before judgment as being ways to develop our philosophical relationship with what we're doing. Because, as of course you can well imagine, used as a means to avoid personal responsibility or indulge selfish or thoughtless desires, horary can keep the client in a state of insecurity by creating dependency on others to take over the liability of decision making. I mean, I'm sure both of you have seen this before, or anyone listening has seen this before. If you've worked with clients, you've worked with individuals, there are people that become addicted to it. There are people that want you to take responsibility for themselves, for their own choices, or there are people who are thinking that they can manipulate you into getting the selfish outcomes that they want for themselves. And it doesn't tend to work very well, but it does work. And there's a term which Liz Green used. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned this before. On the notion of fate and free will, there's also an article in your reading material from Liz Green on the nature of fate. And there's a line in there where she says, any astrologer who is doing predictive work must be prepared to accept the fact that you're supping with the devil. In a sense, you are potentially exposing yourself to negative outcomes or implications. But what those negative outcomes or implications are, basically, they are when we allow other people to lean upon us as a crutch, or when this kind of information is used purely for personal gain, which it can be used for, there's no point pretending it can't. When that happens, things get really convoluted. I won't be teaching you to do that. I'm sure none of you who do this course will do that anyway. But we might as well face facts that it's possible. You can use this form of astrology for gambling. It's used quite successfully. Some people become specialists in it. You can use it just to win money if you want to, or predict the outcomes of sporting events, or speculate on the stock exchange. There's all sorts of ways that you can use it. Whether that's right or wrong, it's not for me to say, but what's definitely wrong is avoiding personal responsibility and developing self-indulgence. So we need to be aware of that and avoid it, especially avoiding undue reliance on horary, which is people becoming addicted to it. I never encourage people to come back, and when clients start to keep on asking the same question in different forms, I just stop it there, because it's not helping them. There's no point. Sorry, slide before, but used as a means to bring greater understanding and find solutions to problems, horary can generate enlightenment, empowerment, self-realization, and freedom from fear of facing upcoming challenges or accepting inevitable limitations. And this is where the free will thing really comes in, because we're not taking away anybody's free will. What we're doing is we're giving them, we're kind of girding their loins, so to speak, so that they can activate their free will, make choices based on maybe accepting challenges or limitations, or maybe taking a different path, or maybe continuing on the path they're already on. It's up to them to choose which way they go, and we just act as an agent to empower that process. Okay, so finally, coming back to Dane Rudhyar, the real function of horary astrology is to establish a state of relationship between universal intelligence and the individual person. It's not fortune-telling as an escape from personal responsibility and effort, still less for curiosity's sake. It's instead a sign of the conscious binding of the individual to the rhythm and purpose of the universal whole, in which he accepts full and deliberate participation. From this whole, the individual receives understanding and healing, and the key to his many problems, which is a lovely way of summing it all up. So, let's bring all of this to a close by thinking about oracles. We're not doing tarot or runes or any of those things here, of course. However, they are other forms of oracle which work equally as well as this form of an oracle. And I would really encourage you to explore what it means to work with an oracle. Now, you've probably done this, I'm sure, hundreds of times before, but in light of the discussion that we've just had, what I'd like you to do is just, at some point that's relevant for you, that fits for you, take the time to sit down with that sense of sacredness, and take the time to sit down and really think about a situation that's going on in your life where you would like greater illumination. Open yourself to creativity and explore the root causes behind the situation, rather than just going for the, oh, will I get this or will I get that kind of answer, which is very human for us to do. I want you to take the time to sit and explore the root causes. See if you can come up with a strategy for addressing the problem in a more competent way, and then record those impressions or results. What I would also like you to do is I'd like you to put down the time, record the time and the place that you do this. Okay, so just write it somewhere. Towards the end of the year, you're going to come back to this exercise. Okay? When you know how to cast a horary chart, you'll cast the chart. But now, use the runes or the tarots or angel cards or whatever you want to work with, but take that creative approach, take that deeper approach, take that sacred approach. See what you come up with, see how it feels, and start to get a sense of this notion of participating in a meaningful cosmos. This awakens both imagination, but it also helps you to, it will also help you see the patterns which unfold through time. All right, now, just lastly, when we so next week when we meet, we'll look at the classical considerations before judgments, continuing to explore what we're doing. And in the group area, I will put up into the forum, I will just put up this question: what's the difference between predicting and fortune telling? please just, when you formulate your thoughts around that, just pop them into the forum. It's more about getting you used to working with the Google apps at the moment than putting in 500 or 1,000 words of work. I don't, just put in a sentence. It doesn't really matter. But just when you've got some clear thoughts about what the difference between the two is, let's pop it in there. And then if someone's made a comment which you find interesting, you agree or you disagree with, mention that in the forum. Use it. Speak to each other. It will really help. As I said at the start, the connectivity you develop with each other will really make a difference in terms of where you get to at the end of this course. Cool. All right. So there we are. Now, just before we bring this to a close, let me hand it back over to the two of you. Do either of you have any questions that you'd like to bring up at the moment? So maybe you first, Carolina, because your microphone's on. So you got any questions?
No, not really. Very clear, very organized. I like it.
Good. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And what about you, Vanessa? Anything that you want to ask about?
No questions. I'm just looking forward to having an excuse to consult my oracles, because sometimes I forget to do this for myself, so it's a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And don't forget, put the day, time and place, wherever you are, on your notes, because you're going to come back to it later on.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for your attention, and anybody else out there listening, thank you for joining us. And I'll say goodbye now, and we will be back again same time next week. So have a wonderful week, and if you need me, you know where to find me. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Take care. See ya.